to the latest Moviescramble podcast, in which we'll be discussing the A24 horror Heretic. Joining me is another salt and pepper haired Lothario who regularly has women chapping on his door. It's John. How are you?
You will be getting me a reputation that I do not deserve, and I actually do not want. I don't want hordes of Moviescramble fans chapping at my door.
Oh no, you'd have to send out a turn.
You know, I'm going to have to start keeping like offcuts of my hair from when I actually go to the barber, so I can hand them out to the throngs.
Oh, absolutely.
People waiting for me. I'm good, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm all right, yes. Just getting used to this wintry weather, which is always, it's always inevitable, but it's never nice when it happens. But since I'm indoors most of the time anyway, voluntarily, not for any...
for any legal reasons.
Yeah, no legal reasons, no medical reasons, so I'm not tagged or anything like that. So, but yeah, I'm all right. So how are you?
Really good. As you say, winter happens every year in Scotland, but it always feels like a body shock when it does appear. So yes, just adjusting to the fact that I'd much rather have the life of like a small house pet where you just like sleep on a blanket and get your hair brushed as opposed to having to brave the elements every day. So, yeah. So, as I said, today we are discussing Heretic.
Are you interested in learning more about the Church of Jesus Christ?
Come on in.
We can't come inside unless another woman is present.
My wife is home. Does that count?
Great.
You like pie?
Yeah.
My wife has pie in the oven.
I could tell that you are a very spiritually curious person.
I think it is good to be religious, to find your faith in a doctrine you actually believe.
Well, our work here is done.
Now, I will go and check on the pie.
So sleep, silent angel.
And that tells the story of two Mormon missionaries, Sister Barnes, played by Sophie Thatcher, and Sister Paxton, played by Chloe East, who are following up on an inquiry from Mr. Reed, played by Hugh Grant. Arriving at his creaky old house in the middle of a storm, the young women soon realise his interest in their religion is going to test their faith to the limits. So, for me, I would like to start off by discussing the establishing scene, because I think that's one of the most powerful introductions to characters that I've actually seen in a long time in the film. So we have the two girls. They are members of the Mormon Church, and they are sitting on a bench, presumably preparing themselves to go and follow up on their inquiries, but they somehow end up discussing both porn and their baptism count. Did that help you understand who these characters were straight away, did you feel?
Yes, because it made them real. It made them sound like real people. They weren't sort of stereotypical church converts. We only get into that slightly later on, but they were two young girls, well, teen girls, basically talking about stuff. It wasn't anything profound. It wasn't lots of talk about Jesus and stuff. It was talk about silly things, which kids talk about, because it is random what people talk about in general life anyway. So yeah, I thought that was a very nice introduction to them, because it humanized them right away, right from the very start. So you were invested in what they were actually doing, because it did seem, at least one of them seemed a little naive as well in the ways of the world right off the bat, obviously when they were talking about pornography. But yes, it was a very good intro, I thought. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious because, well, Sister Paxton could barely say the word pornography, although it was her that had watched it, and she was really embarrassed about that. And the story that she tells obviously is like, it sounds like sort of like amateur porn, and you can hear somebody banging on the wall saying you're making too much noise. So I mean, God knows what she's ended up watching. But yeah, I thought it did a really nice job, because as you say, it establishes that she's slightly more naive. Sister Barnes obviously seems to be a bit more astute and a bit more street smart, I think. And then obviously Sister Barnes has baptized or converted people to her faith, and she promises Sister Paxton that she's going to help her get her baptism count up as well. So it's funny because they go from porn to talking about essentially a body count, but not a body count in the way that contemporary society would would talk about that. So I
Yeah.
thought that was a really neat introduction. And as you say, I obviously, having only seen the trailer for this, thought these characters were going to be quite pious and obviously very holy and very into their religion. So actually seeing them, as you say, kind of talk about nothing or talk about silly things was really refreshing. And I thought as establishing scenes go for characters and set up for the rest of the film, I thought that was one of the most well done that I've seen in a wee while, because it really dropped you right in the heart of who their characters were.
Yes, and it subverted your expectations for the film, because if you see a film poster with the likes of Hugh Grant on it and the way he looks in the film and the sort of the layout and everything and the typography in the poster, you're expecting a certain type of film, and that first scene establishes that you're not going to see what you think you're going to see here. And that is very nice, because it kind of throws you off balance right away, and it makes you kind of sit up and take a wee bit more notice, because if you're expecting just sort of standard horror film, you're not going to get it here. So I thought that was very well done as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned Hugh Grant on the poster there. What were your sort of first impressions of his character called Mr. Reed? And what did you think of his performance overall? Because again, I've really enjoyed listening to him on the press tour talk about what he thought of this particular character.
Yes, I am really enjoying the sort of later stage Hugh Grant.
Me too.
His career is going all over the place. He's moving away from this foppish Englishman in a way that he's doing sort of slightly darker roles. He is opening up to all sorts of things, which I think he would have been offered before but rejected because it wasn't the kind of thing that he felt he should be doing. And I think he's even said that himself. Once he started opening himself up to doing roles where he was playing an absolute shit in some cases, because he's played politicians, and obviously he was in Paddington 2 as well as the bad guy in that. So he is doing a lot of very different things. So when he was introduced into this film, I thought it could go either way. It could be a bit hammy or whatever, but he plays it as if he is a sort of an Englishman, but he is superbly creepy here without going over the top. He does go over the top in certain aspects of it as the film goes on, but to begin with, he's unsettling. And he's politely unsettling at the same time, which is very good.
It's that sense of like English manners, as it were, but there's something about it that's so, as you say, sort of uneasy. And I think that when he first answers the door and he's got the wee watering can in his hand, and you just think he just seems kind of harmless. He's got that sort of patchwork cardigan on, he gets their names mixed up. He's, my wife's in the kitchen, all that sort of thing. So he just does seem really harmless. But I felt that as the film progressed, because obviously he's meant to be a sort of university professor, he did actually remind me of every annoying professor I ever had, that when you gave an answer to them was like, but why have you come to that conclusion? I liked the way that his character did feel like authentic in that sense, true to his profession. And I just thought that there were certain elements of it that were quite hammy, but I think he gets away with it because although this is a small film in terms of like scale, budget, cast, all the rest of it, his performance is so central to everything that unfolds that he kind of gets away with the sort of bigger or more over the top moments. And I think that's carried by likes of the camera work. So you've got a lot of really interesting close-ups, which Hugh Grant has said that he absolutely hates, and that he listens to Beethoven in his head because he doesn't want a camera that close to him ever. What did you think of that? Because I felt like there were moments where the camera felt very fluid and there was a lot of motion, and then there was a lot of really striking, particularly of him, close-ups, and you can see like beads of sweat. How did that add to the atmosphere for you?
Yeah, the camera work actually sort of sets the tone for the film in a lot of ways, because like you say, it's limited sets and limited budgets, so they have to have creative ways of getting across what is actually what the mood and what the themes actually are, and the camera did that in an awful lot of ways. Also, because the actors were very obviously open to it. I mean, for the majority of it, there was only 3 actors actually on screen, so they all had to do an awful lot of heavy lifting in order to make this work. So they had to, like I say, with Hugh Grant, getting the camera quite close up to him and everything, which he may not be particularly happy about. And maybe in another film with more actors, more sets in it, he would say, no, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to do that. It made you feel even more uneasy than you normally would watching this type of film, because the camera did an awful lot like sort of 360s, going right round the room and all that, which I always find really impressive, because it's quite a technical thing to actually do and get it right, and obviously not have like anybody, with like the best boy standing in the corner or something, you just catch a glimpse of him or something. So that's always really impressive. And it kind of it did all the kind of things that you expect in a horror film. There was the sort of the shots over the shoulder, and like you say, there was some very sort of extreme close-ups. And Hugh Grant himself in this film looked like an old, weary man, even more so than he normally does. Obviously, he is a reasonable age now, and he does have grey hair, but he was made up here to look even worse. And that's kind of that can be a challenge for an actor of a certain age, male or female, that they don't want to be sort of portrayed in that way. There is a lot of emphasis still on looking young and looking vital. I mean, we talked about that in the past, obviously, with our discussion on The Substance, where there's a whole industry around that, and the film industry is very much part of that as well, giving off this, elder statesman kind of image of these older actors, and not in that way where they're wearing, like I say, dodgy jumpers and these mad glasses that you would see. It's almost, he almost looked like Tootsie in a way. Those big glasses, it's very, very weird. So yes, I thought it was very inventive, and I thought it was necessary in order to carry the film as well. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, the scene where they first sort of enter into his kind of church, if you want to call it that, or sort of his room where he's got all his books and his candles, the camera work, obviously, that, as you say, the 360 is like a technical feat that I can't even begin to imagine, but it was also making me feel so nervous that something was going to jump out from somewhere, because the camera was sort of panning the room, and you were like, is there something in those curtains? Because it looked like there was a bump, or you were like, is that a statue, or is something going to jump out? There was lots of lovely little touches where the camera work really contributed to the fact that, those girls were obviously very quickly very afraid of this guy, despite the fact that he's got a sort of kind of almost Boris Johnson-esque sort of mop on his head. His hair is slightly messy, as you see, the glasses are old-fashioned, the clothes are kind of weird, and yet he doesn't come across as someone who you shouldn't be afraid of. The girls obviously understand the tone has turned very quickly, and it is through those sort of sweeping shots of the room that you think, something's going to jump out of that corner, or it all just made you feel so uneasy. And I think the set design really contributed to that as well, because it's a very claustrophobic film. It's not quite location, but obviously the vast majority of the action does take place in his house, in these various sort of labyrinthine, layers that he's added to it. Did that also help with the sort of creepiness factor? They felt that you felt trapped in this house as much as, Paxton and Barnes did?
Oh yeah, it was sort of almost like a haunted house in a way, because there was a lot, you could go anywhere in the house and you didn't know what was going to be behind each door. And the mere fact is, when they started off, they were in a room directly off of, it was the front door, and that was them into the first room. And for the first 20-30 minutes when they're in there, they were trying to work out a way of obviously getting back out again through that one door. And there's no spoiler there, they didn't. Otherwise the film, very clear. Yeah. I'm not really giving anything away there by saying that. So the fact that it was this, like you say, it was almost a bit of a labyrinth, and the fact there was a model in plain view as well at one point, where it kind of showed you where everything was, and you got the idea, right, this is quite a tricky place to be in, a really tricky place to try and get out of as well. So it did add to it, obviously. Yeah, it made it very, very creepy indeed, without being scary or jump scary. and in a lot of ways it was a different type of horror.
Yeah, I mean, I did, no surprises here, I did jump a couple of times. The first thing I jumped at is, so obviously they walk into his house and he's got like the wee sign up that says "Bless this mess," and his furniture's kind of quirky and eccentric as well. I did jump the first time the lights went out and he's like, oh, the lights are on a timer, and you kind of go, okay, the lights are on a timer, like that's, but I did you think it's not a conventional horror in the sense that there isn't a lot of jump scares. There is a few. Did you feel like it struck the balance between sort of, there were moments I feel where you were expecting a jump scare to happen and it didn't, which I was quite grateful for, but then there were a few that obviously made me certainly jump out my skin. Did you feel like it got the balance okay on that?
Yeah, I think with these type of films, less is more, because like as we said at the top of the show, you get introduced to these characters and they're not made out to be these, well, for want of a better phrase, religious nutters. They are ordinary people, so therefore your expectations are subverted even at that point. So the fact that when you go into the house and there's a fake jump scare with the lights, and the rest of the time there isn't that much in terms of actual like full in your face horror or jump scares, are sort of the standard tropes that you get with all these films. It makes it a much better film for it, because you're constantly on edge waiting for something to happen, and you're about 40 minutes into the film before you actually realise, wait a minute, all they're doing is sitting about talking. It's not, but it's really absorbing because of that, because you're thinking, this isn't what I was expecting in the slightest. It's completely different to what is normal, what is standard, and I think it just worked really, really well on that basis. It made you think a lot more about what was actually going on, and it didn't give too many things away. It didn't lead up to jumps or anything in the sort of the normal way you get with so many films. But it's always a good thing. It's good to be surprised in that way, I think.
Oh, definitely. And I think that it's interesting in the sense that it's a film that did actually make me think quite a lot during it. And for all that it's called Heretic, I don't actually think it's mocking religion necessarily. I think it is just asking you to think. Did you get that from it? Because I feel like there were conversations that were quite cerebral in it.
Yes. There were very sort of deep conversations, and even though it was focused primarily on the Church of the Latter-day Saints, it used that as a jumping off point to talk about pretty much every religion. Now, I don't know how factual it was, because I don't know an awful lot about religion outside of the sort of Catholic religion, and I know that it took bits from all sorts of different ones anyway. So, and the way the film emphasised that was every religion takes something from every other religion, and what he was kind of looking for was, what's the source of all of these religions? Where does it ultimately come from? What was the kind of the first biggie to sort of ensnare the masses? And yes, it was very cerebral. They were talking about weighty religious and philosophical topics. It was interesting that, like you say, with the sort of professor style, he was always saying, oh, but that's not, are you sure about that? That's not right, because he obviously knew a lot more. Now, in the film, he says he'd been studying religions for 10 years, but it sounded like he'd been studying religions for the whole of his life, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, it sounded like an obsession as opposed to a career.
Yes, yeah, it wasn't just, and I think maybe the 10-year thing was just to initially put the girls at ease, that he wasn't this complete nut job, which they kind of suspected he was, because no matter how nice and charming and talking about blueberry pies and things like that, there was just a wee edge of something going on there. But yes, like I say, I didn't know whether it was 100% true, but I've read a few things saying, yeah, a lot of it was accurate in what he was talking about, and the way that he used like sort of modern analogies and with like some music to reinforce the fact that it's really just a different take. It's been slightly altered or modernized with the religions as well, and that's where you get to the sort of the modern ones now. That he wasn't dismissive of modern religions in the way that a lot of people are. He wasn't dismissive in the way that they're not that old. They're not as established as the sort of the main religious Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They've been about for thousands of years, whereas some of these, like Church of Latter-day Saints, a couple hundred years old, isn't it? If that. So, and they're dismissed almost as being sort of cult-like because they've not been around for as long. But you can say that about all sorts of things, how like certain drugs are treated as being bad for you, and they're frowned upon. But other drugs like alcohol are not frowned upon because they've been, established for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So it's all about the perception and the acceptance of these things. So people accept the certain main religions. Well, I say that. There are a few skirmishes going on at the moment and have been pretty much all the time. But it made you think, and you kind of went, oh, and some of the stuff you may have known wee bits and pieces about, but it went into quite a lot of depth considering it's a horror film,
I thought it was really interesting. I can't imagine there's too many horrors that explain the sort of that wall that he had where he had all the pictures, and it was like, Egyptian gods and Hindu gods and all this, and he's explaining basically how certain religions had picked and like little elements of everything, which I thought was so fascinating. And as you say, it's just absolutely not what you expect from a horror film. You maybe expect, I don't know, the crucifix turning upside down and somebody spider walking down the stairs or whatever, especially because it's got this sort of religious element to it. You mentioned music there. I think music's quite a big part of the film, and obviously they use the Hollies, The Air That I Breathe in the trailer. What did you think of the music? Did you ever think you would hear a Hugh Grant rendition of Radiohead's Creep being used in a film?
No, I didn't, but it kind of fitted in very nicely to the whole tone of the film as well. And obviously there has been discussion about the fact that they used or appropriated certain elements of the Holly song as well. And it played in very nicely to it, and there was obviously a few other wee examples as well. But there wasn't a whole lot of music outside of that. There was a sort of soundscape, but there was an awful lot of space in there, which just let the dialogue breathe. And you were swept up in that, and you weren't getting music cues so much that were telling you, oh, it's getting a wee bit tense here, So it wasn't done in that way, which again is more unusual for a horror film, but in this case worked perfectly well.
Yeah, I think there's maybe only one or two scenes where you do hear those sort of riffs or motifs, whatever you would call them. Whereas, I think a lot of the film is, because there's so much dialogue as well, I think a lot of the film is just left to sort of, it's the dialogue that you hear, not much else, which I actually really appreciate from a horror film as well. As I said previously, like there was no jump scare where you maybe would have anticipated one in a more conventional horror, and I actually really like the fact that it did do things quite differently in terms of score and even just the setup of the characters and stuff like that. So I really did appreciate the fact that the music was used to make a point about iterations, not to direct your attention to an impending jump scare or whatever. It was all part of his sort of big kind of theory as to what religion meant and how it sort of originated. So I really, really liked that.
Yeah,
did your opinion of the character or any of the characters change as the film went on, or do you think it's quite static?
Yes, it did. The Hugh Grant character, he starts off in a certain way, and there's something going on beneath it. And the way that he sort of changes and develops is he becomes more of a sort of antagonist character as the film goes on. The two girls are set out, like you mentioned, in a way that one of them is sort of more sort of worldly wise than the other one. And there are certain expectations when the shit goes down, basically, that they're going to react in a certain way. And to a certain extent, that does happen. But then you see one of the characters developing in a wholly different way, which we kind of have seen before, but it was still nice to see. It was done in a very sort of organic way, if you like. It was more circumstance based rather than some sort of hidden power that they had. And I felt that the film deliberately didn't go there in order for when it was necessary for it to actually happen. It was more powerful. And I did like, and it's always very difficult in a film that's got so few actors in it for them not to develop certain things, because you're as well as carrying the sort of main story, you are trying to develop characters at the same time. Now that's slightly easier if you've got a large sort of ensemble, because you don't need to have people sort of standing up as much and actually speaking, whereas here all three characters were sort of front and center. There was no escaping it. So in order to keep things back while they're doing all this for such a long time is very, very impressive indeed.
Yeah, I think that for me, it was the interesting thing of the Hugh Grant character starts off as someone who obviously, as I say, has an obsession, but is very knowledgeable. And I think as the film progressed, you sort of felt him lose his grip on reality. Like there's the particular scene where he thinks that one of them's a clone or an AI, and it's a contraceptive she has in her arm, which just makes him feel so out of touch and so removed from reality, and also gives you a fascinating little insight into that character, because as he notes, how many Mormon missionaries have the implant, which would obviously imply that she's doing something that she shouldn't be doing as far as her religion's concerned. So I thought it was really interesting how his character progressed, in the sense that it's not that he didn't seem as powerful, because I think he maintains his power throughout the film, but it was maybe that he actually became more dangerous because he seemed more, as I say, out of touch and removed from reality. Yeah. And I really liked what they did with the two girls, the Sister Barnes, Sister Paxton. They are obviously in a situation where probably no matter what they say, there is no right answer to what he wants, and it's how they sort of pull themselves up by the bootstraps and are determined to survive this, essentially, which is not something that their religion could have ever prepared them for. So it's how they're drawn on other aspects of their life in order to sort of overwhelm him, as it were.
It did feel that with Mr. Barnes' character that he was almost working on a script. Yeah. It was all, he had everything prepared about how he was going
like a big show.
Yeah, it was almost like a show and tell sort of thing going on there. So and it felt as if it was very rehearsed. And when you were about halfway through, you're thinking, he may have done this before. This is not the first time he has been here. So, like I say, when things start to go off script, that's when he starts to change, he starts to panic. He is able to improvise to a certain extent, but even then, he doesn't know where that's going to lead, so therefore it makes it a wee bit more tricky for him, and it kind of ups the tension as well, because he becomes a little more erratic than you think he has in the past.
And it's Sister Barnes that says to Sister Paxton, who's the slightly more naive one, she was like, we can't physically overpower him, but we can answer him back, we can challenge him, and that's when the wheels start to come off a little bit, which I think is a really nice touch, because it also acknowledges that in so many horror films you've got these waifs of an actress who's seemingly beating the shit out of someone 10 times the size of her, whereas here they make an acknowledgement that that's just not going to happen, so they have to use their intellect in order to try and outsmart him, which I thought was a really, really nice touch as well. For me, there's lots of what I would call like seemingly meaningless shots in the film. So when the camera's doing like a 360 of his room, you get like that lovely shot where it kind of lingers slightly on the poster of Dante's Inferno, which obviously is a nice little metaphor for what those girls are about to go through. Was there anything that kind of stood out to you as you just think, that's a lovely touch, or I'm so glad they did that, or that just makes so much sense to that character? Because I felt like there was lots of wee incidental things kind of peppered through it.
Yeah, there were lots of wee things that you had on screen, but I feel a lot of them were kind of red herrings. It was just sort of to build the bigger picture of the kind of character that Reed actually was. I called him Barnes about 2-3 minutes ago, so I must apologise for that. And I think there was so much stuff, especially when we were doing the whole 360, that you were kind of thinking, not all of this can be relevant. So
Yeah.
I so in that sort of respect, I kind of stopped looking for wee clues, because then you were kind of saying, well, they've shown this, are they going to use this later on? The whole sort of Chekhov's gun thing, is this going to make a reappearance at some point? So there were lots of wee things, but I think it was more sort of establishing of the character and the situation we're in, rather than the small things. But I take it you picked up on a few things.
Yeah, I really liked the poster, and there was a really nice touch at the beginning where he calls them the wrong names, and that obviously becomes quite a vital plot point later on when they're trying to get their coats to leave, which I'll not spoil. But he called, and you just go, oh, that was lovely. He did that at the beginning, and I like little things like that where you just think, this has all been done, this has all been thought out, lovingly crafted, beautifully, and I appreciate that kind of effort that sort of goes into that. And so my favourite scene in the whole film is when he uses the Monopoly boards to explain religion as well, and how essentially they're all kind of rip-offs of each other. I thought that was actually really well explained. It didn't labour the point, and actually was a very accessible metaphor for what he was trying to get at as well. So I think there is loads of lovely touches in this film that is quite surprising for a film that, if you said to somebody, do you want to go and watch Hugh Grant talk about the origins of the big three religions, you'd be like, no. That sounds quite dry. But I think it's done so well here in such a nice way, that I say a nice way, but you know what I mean, like a really accessible way. But having said that, though, still absolutely rippling with tension, because those two young women are looking at these board games, desperate to find a way out of this house or room, thinking, what the fuck does Monopoly have to do? Am I going to die here? That's, so even though he's going, and there's this edition, and there's this edition, you're thinking, where is this going? And I love scenes like that you just think, I'm not sure what this is about, but I'm really enjoying what's happening.
Yeah, it was a good way of explaining religions and sort of using that as a pointer. And he obviously thought that the use of something like Monopoly would be accessible to young girls, which maybe not, but I suppose it's a board game that everybody knows. That's the whole point of it, or they think they know. It's one of these things. Like I knew Monopoly was taken from another game, the same way that Hoover was not actually invented, wasn't popularized by the person who invented it. They sold the name, and it was made by another guy, and he popularized it, but they kept the name of Hoover. So, and there's countless examples of this.
It's a bit like McDonald's saying that the Founder film.
Exactly, yeah. Same sort of thing, yeah. So, and commerce is littered with examples of these sort of things, because it's always a change. It's always something that's been altered, and that fits very well with the point he was trying to get across with regards to religions and how they are interpreted in different ways. And a lot of religions are about egos. It's always the sort of the figurehead. Every religion has a figurehead,
which is usually male.
Yes, yeah, pretty much, yeah. So no matter what culture you go to, it's this figurehead of a male, and obviously in Western ones, it's Jesus is coming from sort of Middle America or Europe rather than actually the Middle East. There's all that sort of talk as well. So yeah, all good fun.
Even though I even like the touches where he would say a quote. So I think he says, with great power comes great responsibility. And Sister Paxton says, Spider-Man? And he goes, no, Voltaire.
Yeah.
I even like the fact that he was using the quotes to sort of, he thought he was relating to them, but they obviously know them from a very, very different context, which I thought was a lovely, lovely wee touch as well. There was just so many little elements of it that I was like, I could go back and watch this film again and pick it all apart, because there is quite a lot going on beyond the sort of, as I say, the horror elements of it. What did you think of the ending, without giving too much away? Do you think it kind of sets it up for something else? It's quite open to interpretation in terms of, there's obviously a reference to a particular theory that he has regarding butterflies. It's not the butterfly effect, it's something else. What did you think of, how did you, were you satisfied with the conclusion? Were you quite happy that that's how it had all been tied together? Did you want to see more?
I don't know if I want to see more, because I felt it was kind of tied up really nicely. within that film, but there will obviously be the temptation for, if not the filmmakers, for someone to go back and do either a prequel or a sequel, because there is ample sort of story there for going into the character, the Mr. Reed character as well, because obviously he arrives here in this film fully formed. So where did he come from? Where did it all come about? Or it could quite easily go off after that. With most films, even though they have an ending, if you actually treat it as if it's real life characters, then they do obviously go on past the end of whatever the story you're telling. So yes, there is ample room there for other elements to be brought in. Whether it would actually dilute the main one in any way, just by reference, I don't know. It would have to be something really good in order to take it forward.
I do agree with you, because I almost think like it's quite a nice, neat little package, and you almost kind of don't want to know how Mr. Reed got to that point in his life that he's in. As you say, he arrives a sort of fully formed character. I feel like deep diving into it any more than they already have would almost kind of spoil how well this is put together in it, as I say, in a kind of neat little package. So I thought the ending was very open, and obviously Chris and I went to see it, and we were like, oh, does that mean it's this that's happened? Does that mean it's that's happened? I like a film that, again, it still has you thinking beyond the credits. So I did really like that. But no, I don't feel the need for any prequels, sequels, spin-offs, world building franchises. I know Sammy probably would love that, but not for me in this case.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear about things that have generated sequels now, the one that pops into my mind is the Black Phone 2, which is obviously in production at the moment, and I thought that was a fantastic film and I loved it.
You loved that film, yeah.
Do I want to see another one? It doesn't have the same element of surprise or intrigue, because you have characters that are established and are situations that are established. Does it need to be gone over again? Because there always will be with any follow-on film, be it prequel, sequel, or is it sidequel, I think they call it.
That's a new one for me.
It's adjacent to the film, but it's not.
Right.
It fits in with the film, but it's not in the past or the future. And it's just something associated with it. Maybe the cleaner of the house that comes in this film, or whoever he buys his records from, that kind of thing. It could be something like that, or whoever put his electrics in, because they're they must be interesting. Put the lights in the timer that's locked away in a box. So by doing that, you by necessity, you have an audience built in that's going to see this second film because they liked the first one, but you're also trying to appeal to new viewers at the same time. So therefore, you're going to go over some of the same source elements, and that kind of takes away from you're explaining things that may not need explained for you to enjoy the film. Which
maybe we'll just get a spin-off where it's Hugh Grant building his house, because obviously when they walk in, he's like, "Are you okay with the metal in the walls and the ceiling?" I'm going, what the hell kind of question is that? So maybe we'll get how did he get city council planning permission to build his house?
That was a really weird one when they said there is metal in the walls, and I was kind of thinking, what is it, lead lined or something? Is he going to be one of these? Because I initially think, is he going to be one of these tin hat wearing, aliens are real type of people? And you're kind of thinking, whoa, where does that come from? Because it doesn't look like that sort of environment. He doesn't look like that sort of person. So you're kind of thinking, it's a wee bit of a red flag right there. So it's But what I like the fact that even though the girls were completely reticent about going into the house in the first place, and he said, my wife's in the kitchen, they accepted that and they came in because they were under certain pressures from their religion and from their home base in order to try and convert as many people as possible. So they kind of felt they had to, plus the fact it was peeing with rain outside as well. So it wasn't particularly nice. All the elements kind of came together to force through that door.
It did also make me wonder, though, about actual missionaries, because how many of them have gone into houses never to be seen again?
Yeah.
It seems like a very dangerous way to try and bring new people into your church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the mere fact that they have to set a rule that says they can't go into a house unless there's a female in the house as well, obviously is a sign that it doesn't always go well, or it hasn't in the past. Yeah. I like the fact that they had to do that as part of their training and development within the church. And it's only sort of the newer churches that do that sort of thing, send missionaries around. It's Jehovah's Witnesses, it's Church of Latter-day Saints that do send missionaries around. Not in the sense, like, obviously we had Christian missionaries, but they were going to, well, what we talked about in the last film, the dark continent, in order to do something, in order to convert people. But you don't really get that with the more established churches. They don't come round the doors very often trying to sell you on, what their beliefs are. You get it from the more modern ones, and that's why, to a certain extent, some people regard them as more sort of cultish.
I think so, because it comes across as really like heavy sales. And also Mr. Reed makes the comment of, that's why when you go to disaster zones, you'll offer help if they'll take a Bible and things like that. So he sees it as very transactional and salesy as well, because it's like, we'll help you, but only if you believe what we believe, sort of thing. So he even kind of points out the sort of transactional nature of these newer religions as well, which I thought was quite interesting.
There is that with established religions as well, but it's slightly different. There's obviously still a transactional element. You're obviously encouraged to support whatever church you're involved in, whether it be the wee brown envelope that you hand over your offering or whatever, or putting money into the wee dish that comes around. Obviously, there is a transactional element there, but it's more up front with these more modern religions. Yeah, it's almost like the people like who are coming to your door, like trying to sign you up for like Save the Children or whatever, and it's not. They don't just want now to have a donation; they want to have your bank details so that you can set up a direct debit and send something to them every month. So it's recurring payments, so they don't need to come around the doors all the time. But so it's they're using they're all using modern techniques to try and lure people in, and they obviously feel they have an audience for it because there's enough sort of disenfranchised people out there who are not happy in their lives and they're looking for some sort of answer. And these modern churches say, we're quite open, look, lots of young people here, all this, wearing sensible underwear, so come join us,
Or magic underwear, as it's called. I did like the fact that when they were first talking, she said that she thought the South Park musical had done damage to them, which really made me laugh because I only saw the Book of Mormon for the first time a couple of years ago, and as she said, the songs are really catchy.
Yeah. I'm going to go and see it next May. It's coming back to Glasgow.
Oh, you'll have a blast.
So yeah, I'm going to go and see that, which should be quite good. Obviously Simi had recommended it long time ago. He'd seen it and a few other people, and obviously yourself as well. So yeah, it will be good. I don't think it will be as scary as Heretic.
No, definitely not. Although it will have you singing some very questionable songs. Not questionable in the sense like just not ones you could sing out loud, like in an office situation, but when they're in your head, they are there for the duration. So
nice.
Yes, it's really good. Is there anything else you want to touch on for this film? Anything that I've missed?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it. The film subverts expectations, so that was the only thing that really did kind of jump out. I mean, we've already discussed that anyway, so no, I think you've covered pretty much everything that is salient.
And so, would you recommend Heretic to anyone?
Oh, absolutely! I would recommend this film to everybody, even people who say they don't like horror films, because it's not what they would expect to be a horror film. So yes, I would recommend it. And I think, and I've been saying this quite a lot over the last couple of months with regards to some of the films we've been talking about, it's probably up there for me in terms of one of the best of the year. So yeah, more power to it. What about yourself?
Yeah, I felt the same. I would absolutely recommend it. It really it's actually just very interesting as a concept, and the characters are very interesting, and the stuff that you learn is really interesting. So I think that, as you say, it subverts expectations. And yeah, another film that I've been to see where I think that could easily be top 10 of the year material. And I'm very much enjoying Hugh Grant's second stage of his career. I'm loving the fact that he's just sort of thrown caution to the wind and is because whenever I think of Hugh Grant, I always think of the Alistair McGowan and Ronnie Ancona impression, and he always makes him say things like, oh, shickety brickety and stuff like that, and just makes him sound like an absolute moron, where he's clearly enjoying playing these sort of kind of camp villain type of roles. So yeah, more power to him. I would absolutely recommend Heretic. So as we said, Heretic has a really small cast. For the vast majority of the time, there's just 3 actors on screen. So we thought we would pick our top 3 films with smaller casts, i.e. 5 or less, I think is fair to say. So John, do you want to kick us off with your first pick?
Sure. My first pick is the 2011 film The Sunset Limited. This is a drama that stars Tommy Lee Jones and Samuel L. Jackson and nobody else. It's set in one room of an apartment. It is based on a play written by Cormac McCarthy. The film itself is, as you can imagine, 2 people talking in a room. The backstory to it is the character played by Samuel L. Jackson, who is not named in the film but is actually called Black, and Tommy Lee Jones is a character who's called White in it, and that's just the names are given. But I think it's not based on the fact that Samuel L. Jackson is black. I think they were just black and white to show the sort of opposites between the 2 characters, and the poster's the same. It's a black and white poster and everything as well, so it all kind of works in. Basically, White tried to commit suicide by throwing himself in front of a train, which is the Sunset Limited of the title, which is a cross-country Amtrak train in the States. And Samuel L. Jackson happened to be on the platform at the same time and saved him, despite him not wanting to be saved, obviously. He takes him back to his apartment and basically talks to him to try and figure out why he attempted to commit suicide, and basically to talk him out of trying to go and do it again. Now you're thinking this could be a film that after 15 minutes you would get really bored with, but it's 91 minutes and it is just the 2 of them talking. There are similarities to Heretic in that Black is a very religious man. He's like a normal blue-collar worker, and he has been in prison as well. He was in prison for murder, I believe, whereas White is a professor, so he's very well read, but he's never read the Bible, and the Bible is pretty much the only book that Black reads, and they talk about that. They talk about religion, there's elements of philosophy. They talk about why he wanted to kill himself in the first place, and sort of the futility of his sort of, or the seeming futility of his situation. And obviously, because Black saved him once, he has this impression that it was destiny for him to save him and therefore to stop him trying to kill himself. And that's basically all the story is. It's just a back and forth with them. They're either sitting at opposite sides of the table, or like a small sort of kitchen table, or it's almost like a doctor-patient bit where one of them's sitting on a seat and the other one's like lying on the couch. So the film itself makes great use of the surroundings. Tommy Lee Jones has directed a couple of films. He's not done very many, but he makes real use of the camera here by making sure that it's always on the move, and when it has to be. Obviously, sometimes when you're sitting and there's maybe one of them making a speech, sort of monologuing, if you like, then it's going to be fixed on them. But it moves about, and there's lots of over-the-shoulder shots and nice wee tracking shots and everything. And it keeps your attention in the same way that Heretic keeps your attention. And it is really just 2 people having a conversation together, and it's fantastic. It's really, really good.
That sounds so powerful.
It is.
The concept of it and why those characters have come into each other's lives. That sounds really, really interesting.
And it makes it all the better because you have 2 seasoned actors in the roles as well. So it's very well written. Obviously, Cormac McCarthy is a very good writer anyway, so and obviously he's done an awful lot of stuff, but it just kind of holds your attention for the whole film. It's a fantastic piece of work. It is available on Sky Cinema at the moment here. I watched about half of it again last night because I watched it was over 10 years ago, but when we talked about this was the first one that actually sprung to mind because it was so sort of memorable in that way. So that's my first pick.
That's a great pick. I have gone down the thriller route. Again, this was the first film that popped into my head when we said small cast. So I've gone with 2018's Guilty, directed by Gustav Mahler. So this is the original Danish language version of the film that I think has subsequently come out with Jake Gyllenhaal more recently. So this Jakob Sedergren as Asger Holm. So he is a beat cop who's been sentenced. I say sentenced. He's basically doing desk duty because he has shot an innocent bystander. So he's on the phones for a night. So we get lots and lots of close-ups of his face and the clock ticking, and we realise it's after 11:30 at night. He's presumably coming in to the end of his shift. And what this film does is, although it's set in a busy police station and you can hear noise in the background, essentially what we get is a performance between him and Jessica Dinage, who phones in, obviously, to the police line to say that she has been abducted and that she's worried about her 6-year-old daughter called Mathilde. So essentially what this film is, I think it's about 90 minutes long, is a phone conversation between Jakob and Eben, who's Jessica Dinage's character. And you're sort of piecing together this abduction at the same time as Asger, sorry, not Jakob, but you're never quite sure if the person on the other end of the phone is telling the truth. So you almost feel like you're playing this kind of cat and mouse game, and there's lots of gorgeous, intense close-up of Jakob Sedergren, and he's, obviously puzzling this. He's hearing shocking things on the end of the phone. You're aware that time is running out, and then you get a phone call where it's Mathilde, the 6-year-old, and she's now suddenly on the phone. So there's actually only sort of one main actor. The other two kind of key performances are voice actors who we never get to see. And I just think it's a brilliant film because, again, it subverts your expectations. The pacing's fantastic. It really doesn't overstay its welcome. It is just that sort of tight 90 minutes. And they feel really agonizing because, as I say, you're just not sure if you're being told the truth because you're introduced to him as a character who, obviously, as I say, he's shot an innocent bystander, so he's not exactly good at his job. And he's, there's obviously a cloud hanging over him as to whether or not he'll be able to continue as a police officer. And then you've got Eben, who's saying that, she's in the back of a van and she doesn't know where she is and she thinks she's getting taken across the city. But is she telling the truth? She's saying it's her ex-husband who's abducted her. It's just a fascinating film. And as I say, it's the first one I thought of because I really loved the central performance from Jakob Sedergren, but also I thought the fact that the other characters, you're only ever introduced to them via phone call, I think is really powerful as well, because obviously you can't see their facial expressions, you can't see where they are, you're only getting their version of the story through the phone. So I think it's well worth seeking out. I believe it was on Netflix for a while, and I saw this on Film 4 a long, long time ago, so I don't know if it would still even be on Channel 4. But if you like a nice, tight thriller where you're piecing things together at the same time as the lead character, this is a great watch. I think it's a very, very well done film that will keep you guessing right up until the end.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good choice. I saw this film, I think, when it came out. I don't know if it was screened as a festival or whatever, but yeah, so I loved it. Thought it was a fantastic movie. Such a good concept. And like I say, because it's mostly phone-based conversations, you've got very little idea in terms of who's being truthful and who's really just stringing you along as well. And the fact that the main character has got so much going on as well, the whole reason for him actually being in the police station in the first place, and not actually out on the beat and all that, works really, really well.
So your next pick?
Well, I was, up until about 25 seconds ago, going to pick Gravity, but then I actually remembered another one that I wanted to talk about, and that is the 2002 film Phone Booth, which stars...
Oh my God!
I know.
Yeah.
which basically there is a cast list of 5 in this, and you basically don't see most of them anyway. It was only when you were talking about the phone conversations it kind of came to mind. It stars Colin Farrell, Forrest Whitaker, and Katie Holmes and Keith Sutherland. Basically, a man played by Colin Farrell. He's called Stuart. He's a very sort of arrogant sort of guy. I think he's a publicist, and he's very sort of up himself, and he's basically horrible. He's not nice at all, and he's having an affair with a client and stuff like that. And he always uses public telephones. And he gets interrupted when he's actually making a telephone call, and then the phone goes again, and it's this voice saying, "Do not move, because if you move, you are going to get shot." Mm-hmm. And at first he kind of thinks, it's just a crank call, and then he very much realizes that that is not the case at all, that it is very, very real. And the drama unfolds from there because he cannot move from this public call box. Now, I know for all of you people out there that don't know what a public telephone is, it's a device that used to be out on street corners, and you put money. Money is like coins and things like that.
I know, that's the thing. Nobody carries money either, so nobody's ever going to be able to use a phone booth.
Yeah, or you could buy phone cards as well. And they were on every street corner and basically using before the sort of popularization of mobile phones, and that basically got rid of pretty much all of them. So obviously with a public phone, there are a number of people all the time who are always looking to use it. So he's standing there, obviously he cannot leave the phone at any time, and other people are trying to get in there and say, have you finished with that, mister? And he's saying, he's still being his arrogant self by telling people basically to bugger off, get out of here and all this. And he's doing it for their own safety, but they don't see it as that way. They just see him as being controversial. And then obviously certain things happen. People die. And then the police get involved as well, because it becomes apparent that he's there for a reason as well. And there's the whole sort of police drama around that. Now, this film is 80 minutes. It's not a long film at all. Yeah. Basically because I don't think they could stretch the premise really past that. Anything more than that would have been sort of a bit it wouldn't have worked if they'd tried to add in more elements or sort of lingered on certain parts of it. But again, this film, in sort of the same way as Heretic, it relies on a very, very good central performance. And it's Colin Farrell in one of his first sort of Hollywood films.
Yeah, I remember this film so clearly, yeah.
He's fantastic, and he's horrible in it, but he's really fantastic because for part of the film, you're kind of hoping that he gets shot in the head really quickly because he's not nice.
Yeah.
So yes, that was my second pick.
Do you know, talk about films that would never get made now. Nobody knows what a bloody phone booth is, so that is such a good pick. I totally forgot that existed until you said that there. That was great.
What's yours? Next one?
To put a dampener on things. My next pick is actually a Croatian film called Safe Place that I saw at the Glasgow Film Festival in 2022. So it's a feature debut for Juraj Lerotic. He is the writer-director, and basically this is a sort of semi-autobiographical account of his own brother's issues with his mental health. So the film centres around Bruno, who is played by the writer-director, and his brother Damir, who is played by Goran Markovic, and their mother. And the film opens with Bruno trying to kick down his brother's door because he's obviously made an attempt on his life. And again, kind of similar to The Guilty, you sort of are aware that they move to a hospital situation. You're aware of, for example, like nurses and doctors like walking up and down corridors because you can hear that sort of trainer sound on the floor. Yeah. But the film really centres around the three of them and how desperate they are to get help for Damir, because obviously he no longer wants to be on this earth. And it's a really interesting sort of family drama in the sense that obviously we get to understand their dynamics as brothers or as mothers and sons, and who's going to look after Damir and all this sort of thing. But it's also quite a scathing look at how people with mental health issues are treated within the system, in inverted commas. Damir has obviously made a very serious attempt on his life, and yet his mother says the doctors are basically scoffing at us. They're never going to be nice to him. So it is a really, and I think quite a personal thing, obviously, because the writer-director was talking about his own brother's experience. I imagine there's probably a little bit of catharsis in this, in the sense that he's sort of taken pops at these institutions that should have helped, or, you know, should have put systems in place to support. But it's the three performances that are so powerful. The actor that plays Demir in particular, you know, he's sitting in his wee hospital jammies and he just looks so vulnerable. It's very intense, very heavy. It's your typical festival fodder. It's, you know, you're not watching this for a laugh. But I think because it's just the three leads, it feels really intimate, it feels really personal. It obviously is a personal story for the director, but this sort of popped into my head because I just remember thinking they got the family dynamics so right, and obviously they got their point across about how people are not supported the way they should be. Unfortunately, I don't think this is streaming anywhere, but if you do ever come across it, it is a fantastic film. The writing and the direction is brilliant, and as I say, all of their performances are so honest, I think, and very vulnerable, which you would expect from a film like this. But it's heavy, but a fantastic watch.
I didn't think I'd seen this, but when you started describing it, I remembered it right away because I did see it. It was a festival watch. Yeah. You're right, it is grim. It is absolutely grim, almost from the word go. I think the first scene where he's running towards the apartment block where his brother is in, and you're thinking, okay, I've kind of got a sense of what this film is going to be like now. And there's no music from what I remember in it as well.
Nothing.
There's nothing like that at all.
As I say, it's things like people's footsteps in a hospital corridor or something. So as I say, you're aware of other presences, but the three are the sort of main cast. But yeah, it's a very grim watch. But I think in a film like that, had you had a bigger cast and lots of characters, the messaging, which obviously is so personal to the writer-director, maybe would have got a bit lost. I think the fact that he keeps it tight and it's just the three leads is really worth it. So I'm assuming you maybe have a cheerier one for your third pick, no?
Actually, no, I do not have a cheerier
Okay, we're getting more grim. Excellent.
Yeah. Well, no, this is sort of more standard horror fare than anything else. My third pick is it's a 2016 horror film called The Autopsy of Jane Doe.
What a film.
Yeah,
Great
stars
pick.
Brian Cox and Emil Hirsch. They are a father and son duo who run a coroner's office, and this Jane Doe body comes into them sort of late at night, and the son is supposed to be going away on a date with his girlfriend, but he says, no, I'll stay and I'll kind of help out, because he wants to do the right thing for his dad, because his dad's on his own and all this sort of stuff. Now the body that comes in is like a real sort of strange one, not just the fact that it's unidentified, but there is sort of very sort of strange elements to her body. It shows that she's got lots of internal injuries. There's no rigor mortis. It's there's signs that she's been wearing like a corset for most of her life. She's still got her there's still blood in her veins and all that, so they can't actually figure out how she's been dead and like how long she's been. They could kind of estimate, maybe a couple of days, there may have been smoke inhalation, there's all sorts of things going on and they just cannot figure it out. And then of course things start to happen within the autopsy room as well. And a nice wee touch, their rooms that they actually do the autopsies in is actually in a basement. So you have to get down to it. Yes, And it's a good way to actually get people trapped as well, because things start to happen, the lights start to go out. And
it's not like a snowstorm or something as well.
There's all sort of we hark back to Heretic. There's all sorts of weather elements and things as well. So, they find that they both get kind of creeped out, and they start finding things like there was a tooth wrapped in cloth and Roman numerals and all this sort of stuff. So there's all sorts of sort of supernatural elements to it. And they kind of figure out things are not really what they should be at all. And they basically try and get out of there. And of course, by that time, they're trapped. And basically from there, the shit goes down. And it's really, really creepy. And again, you've got two people and a corpse basically in this film. Yeah. And the corpse gets credited as a credited actor
Yeah.
that is actually the corpse as well, and it's a really, really good film. I really enjoyed it. I was completely freaked out by it when I saw it, because these kind of, sort of these sort of body horror elements of it, and sort of dead bodies and digging into them is quite gruesome anyway. But then when you've got all the shit around it as well, it's a really, really good film.
That is a great pick. I absolutely shat myself. It was so scary. I remember watching it. I had the cushion up. There was points where I was like, please just make this end. I can't take this anymore. It was so scary. I thought it was really well done. That is an absolutely great pick. On a sort of similar vein, I'm going down the horror route for my last one. I am going with the 2007 Oren Peli found footage film Paranormal Activity. So this has Katie Featherston as Katie and Micah Sloat as Micah, who are a couple. They move into a house. So you're getting their sort of video diary of what it's like to move into their house, which is all very pleasant. But then obviously things start to go wrong, and they start to document their every move for a different reason, because they believe there's something in the house. And obviously they have these really strange occurrences. They start to video themselves at night time. I just have such a strong memory of going to see this in the cinema. It was with my theatre studies friends that we were all at uni together. I hadn't heard anything about it, didn't know what the film was. And to this day, I will never forget this. So there's two leads. They obviously carry the entire film. It sort of rejuvenated the whole found footage kind of cinema experience. But I will genuinely never forget, there's a scene where the duvet sort of ripples between them, and there was a guy in the cinema who just went, "Oh my God," like that really loudly. And everyone sort of laughed because they needed that reprieve, because we were all absolutely shitting ourselves. And then, of course, there's a scene where he gets dragged out of bed and right down the corridor, and the screams in the cinema. Generally, I've never experienced a cinema viewing like it. It was so one of a kind. It was so well marketed, in the sense that it wasn't marketed at all. You were going into it completely blind. It obviously spanned a whole bunch of sequels. But I think as two leads go, you've got Katie Featherston and Micah Sloat, who were complete unknowns, and they absolutely carry this film. I think their fear feels palpable. I think their reactions seem genuine. Obviously, if you were getting flung about your house, you would be shit scared. So I think this is a great example of how found footage films can work really well, but also how a very small cast, you don't need other people coming in and adding their opinions to this, or other sort of background characters. You basically just need these two to carry the entire the film, and they absolutely do. I actually don't think I could go back and watch this film, because that cinema experience was enough. I am one and done with this particular film, and as I say, I've just got such strong memories of the audience being so up for it and really reacting. So I think it's a great example, if you enjoy a horror film and a good scare, this is a great example of that, as well as obviously being of a small cast.
Nice. I have not seen any of the Paranormal Activity films at all.
Really?
It's a bit of a blind spot for me. I don't know why. Probably because I'm a big shite bag, same as everybody else, but
they do decline in quality, like it.
Of course,
that's a given. But the first one, I think, is so iconic for so many reasons. And as I say, that guy in the cinema, like, men don't usually. I feel like men don't usually react in that way, but for him to have this outburst, everyone was just like, "Okay, this is really bad," and we're all very scared.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
So definitely worth checking out the first one at least. I think it's probably obviously the best of the franchise.
Yeah, as I say, it is a blind spot, and I have been meaning to watch them some point, so this is a good excuse to watch at least the first one, and of course then the influence of Simi is not too far away. End up watching them all, because they were kind of competing around about the same time as with the Saw films, weren't they? They would come out around about the same sort of time every year. Oh, excellent, very good choice.
Well, that is everything from this particular episode of the Moviescramble podcast. If you want to find us on social media, we are on Facebook, X, Instagram, and now Blue Sky. We are all at Moviescramble. We also have a YouTube channel. And if you want to email John, you can email him podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. We've also recently redone our website, so if you want to go and have a look there, it's moviescramble.co.uk, and you can tell us what you think of John's snazzy new design.
Well, you had an element in it as well. Mary did all the sort of the graphics for our banner and things like that, and redesigned everything like that. And I must say, they look bloody brilliant, especially the one on the podcast.
Yeah, I really love that. I think that's really nice. So yeah, let us know what you think of that. And otherwise, we will see you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.